is Friday, 12 noon Eastern Time. And what does that mean? It's time for another episode of the Chimney and Fireplace Success Network. And don't let that name fool you, because no matter what kind of business you're in, I will guarantee you there's going to be things of value in this presentation today. So if you're watching us live, hey, we welcome you here. Feel free to ask any questions, make any comments during the presentations. If you're watching the replay, hey, we want you to get value out of that also. So again, welcome. And just like every week, we try to find something that will be truly inspirational and inspiring. And this week is no different, because I met a gentleman a couple years ago through a coaching group that I participate in that deals with how to go live, how to do what we're doing right now, using StreamYard and all that. And I met this gentleman in there, and he actually does kind of what I do on a whole different level of companies than what I work with, because I specialize in home service contractors. And his name is Jeffrey Wolfe. And why he is a guest here today, he recently wrote a book that I think is a true inspiration for everybody to use, because when I read this book, and the title of it is Perform or Perish. So when I looked at this, Jeffrey, something hit me all at once in this book. And I've actually been using this since I read the book, which is one of the problems why people don't change is there's no deadline. In other words, we can just keep doing this crap because we got some money in the bank, or we can get loans at the bank or whatever, but we just don't have this deadline. In fact, I even told a client this morning, this clock is ticking towards midnight, and I don't want to see you hit midnight and where everything falls apart. Now, what's also special about this episode is, and it's not special because we're missing her, but because of another commitment, Randy can't be with us today. So what I've done is, our guest last week, his name was Randy Spurling, or is Randy Spurling. And Randy did such a fantastic job last week. I sent him a note. I said, hey, man, Brandy's not going to be on this week. You want to sub for? So now, Jeffrey, what you're going to do is you're going to get, and we're going to find out just how good Randy's interview skills are and what kind of questions he can come up with for Jeffrey Wolfe. Okay. So anyway, Jeffrey, let's start out. Let's give folks a little bit about your background and what do you do?
Well, I guess the best place to start is really I'm a recovering engineer. My name is Jeff, and I'm a recovering engineer.
Okay.
Because I went into engineering out of high school because they were hiring. I grew up in the Midwest, and it was in the 70s and 80s when steel and automotive and all the major industries that made that part of the country such a great place to live and work were collapsing. Jobs were scarce. And I was like, man, what am I going to do when I get out of high school? And I was able to get in engineering school. They had a great placement program on graduation. So that was all the thought that went into my future and my career. Because at that time, all I really wanted, my vision in life was just, hey, you know what? If I can get a good job so I can afford to have a Harley or two and be able to ride on the weekends and do a few motorcycle runs, we're good. That's all I really need. Some toys and a little bit of lifestyle, and we're good to go. That altered my life. I had an opportunity to work for Hughes Aircraft, which took me to Los Angeles. And that was probably a lot of people, if you're under 40, you probably haven't heard of Hughes Aircraft, but it was an icon in its day. And it just opened my mind to things that could be possible. And I took that rebellious streak that you might suspect exists, since I mentioned Harley Davidson motorcycles, and turned it into kind of a corporate disruptive career. So I was the kid that always goes, well, why is it like that? Well, why can't we do this? Why does that happen? And being, continually asking why landed me in a department that had I didn't know it at the time, they had the charter to kind of disrupt the company. They were bringing new stuff in, and that launched a career that led to being able to do the work with the company that I wrote about in the book Perform or Perish. And it's been a wild ride, and it still took that rebellious streak and turned it into hey, why can't we make this company work better? And I got involved in the 1990s when the aerospace industry, through the peace dividend after we got done with the Cold War with the Soviet Union, we had 136 prime contractor. So those were the companies, the aerospace companies that did business directly with the military, U.S. military and federal government. In 8 years, we went from 136 to 9. And the whole supply chain collapsed. And I learned a lot. Had some heartbreaking experiences with companies that just didn't make it, and was blessed with the opportunity to say, hey, you know what? Let's apply this to working with small businesses and helping them thrive instead of getting beaten up in the market.
Got you covered. So I got 2 questions for you.
Sure.
First one is, what kind of Harley?
Right now, I'm riding a 2002 Wide Glide CVO.
Got you covered, because I'm no Harley guy. I have full dressers. I had Softails. Sheryl had a Fat Boy trike at one time with a Lehman trike.
Nice.
So that's question number 1. Question number 2, did you ever meet Howard Hughes?
I did not. That was after Howard Hughes had passed away.
Okay.
But it was early enough. So it was 1984, to date myself a little bit. When I went to work for Hughes, there were still people that worked there that had worked with Howard Hughes. So it still had, still had that Wild West vibe within the company, because these were the best systems engineers in the world at that time. Consider this. When I went to work for Hughes Aircraft outright owned 85% of the satellites that were in orbit.
Wow.
So they were commercializing the laser. They were putting stuff up in space. They were one of the companies that, when the U.S. government or someone else, and Howard Hughes had set this culture in place, being who he was, that large organizations would come to and go, we had this impossible problem, and they're like, oh no, we got this. Here, bring it over here.
Yeah.
Let me show you how to solve this.
Yeah, and you look at it, and I think a lot of people wear, because believe it or not, I'm seeing a lot of Howard Hughes on TikTok these days. There's actually a lot of stuff in the movie that was out about him, all that, the AV and all that. So Very unique individual. Well, Randy, you're our special guest interviewer today. So hey, I'm gonna go to you first. What will be the first question you would ask Jeffrey during today's episode?
Well, I think the first thing I want to ask you is that, as I was listening to do my research, because I was asked yesterday to speak, I heard a lot. I went through a ton of your podcast yesterday, and now it makes sense to me.
I'm sorry.
No,
let me apologize for that right up front.
Don't be sorry. But it makes sense to me why a lot of your podcasts have a certain focus, that chaos means opportunity.
Yeah.
Because if you saw 184 go down to 9, what did you learn from that when you were watching that?
Pivot. Today the current term would be pivot. You really have to be able to be in touch with what's going on in the marketplace, constantly look for opportunities, and be able to adapt. Right? It is those that are most adaptable. It's Darwinism in the marketplace. Those that are most adaptable survive. One example was, there was a company that built that was good at making oddly shaped steel plates for aircraft, because with aerodynamics, you get these really weird shapes on some parts of the aircraft that have to be that way to manage airflow in flight. Sure. And they were able to because they were one of the best in the world. There are like 3 companies that could do what they did at the level they did it. They ended up working in automotive, being able to for exotic cars, because they could bend the metal in a way that very few companies could.
Yeah, when I was listening to your podcast, I heard that theme a lot. Chaos means opportunity. I have a phrase I use quite often, that's complications limit competition. And it's the same mindset, right? Yeah. If there's complications in the marketplace, whatever it is, things are expensive. When people say stuff's expensive, well, if you can invest in it and get ahead of the curve, you're way ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I was sitting in a meeting with it was an executive meeting. We're sitting in a boardroom at this company with their chief engineer, just came back from the industry trade show for their marketplace. And we're having a debate. They were number 1 in technology in their field, but they were starting to fall behind. A major Japanese electronics company had just stepped into their marketplace. Hitachi was in the booth next to them at the trade show. Hitachi's writing orders for their new product. They're doing a demo on a product that doesn't quite work, but set a record for it was high-speed magnetic tape storage for scientific instruments, set a record at what they did, but they couldn't sell it yet because it was so pressing the state of the art in manufacturing for what they did that it wasn't a stable system. And his argument was, well, Hitachi, they had no clue of what it meant to have someone like that enter as a direct competitor. And he made the statement, we were talking about optical storage. He's like, optical storage will never be a direct threat to magnetic tape. And I was like, we're not going to be working with this company long. Part of the problem was I'm sitting there looking at him, and from my experience in aerospace, what I couldn't tell him because of how I knew it was it was already in the field.
Sure thing.
One of the things I learned from aerospace, what you see in the field, the most latest, greatest state of the art is 20 years behind what somebody's already got in the field someplace.
Somebody else. We know what you're talking about. Right. There's a small company up in Rochester, New York that didn't used to be small because they believed all film was going to surpass. That company, Kodak, is out of touch, right? Like they're so out of touch.
And they invented the digital camera.
We know. Yeah, we know. We've seen all the written articles here locally. It's insane.
Right. And if you look at this, it's like, Sears Roebuck. Did they consider that Amazon was going to kick their butts one day? No. And they didn't reinvent. And there's so many stories in American business like that.
Yeah.
So Sheryl, your turn next. What's the question you would ask? Because Jeffrey, I know she just read your book because she read it coming back. She was with me on a business trip and read it in the car coming back yesterday. So Sheryl?
Well, I read the book. So we have a lot of listeners, I hope, that didn't know the book existed up to this point. So give them a little preempt of what inspired you to write this particular book, Perform and Perish, and what do you hope the readers will get from reading it?
I appreciate that. And let me back up for a step too. And I missed this at the beginning of the show. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on the show today. And I appreciate, Sheryl, that you read the book, and Jerry, you as well. It's wonderful to be able to talk with people that I respect and that I've learned from, and to be on the show and get to meet Randy and Josh as well. To your question, it just breaks my heart to see companies get stuck and be in a position where it's like, the clock's ticking. Now they realize the clock's ticking. And for the most part, they're just going, there's no way we're going to be able to get this done fast enough, which isn't true based on my experience. And plus, what I hope people can take away from that is, it's about perspective. If you're asking the right questions and looking to learn and open to adapting and testing and trying new things, then you're going to be way ahead of most of the people in your marketplace, because they're not doing that. They're chugging along with, hey, this is what works. They're doing what everybody in the industry is saying. This is what we've always done. I've heard that so many times. This is what we've always done. And it's like, no, you know what? You can grab stuff from another industry and adapt it and apply it fast to get results in a way that's sustainable over the long haul.
Okay. So let's put a shout out. Doug Wing, who's a friend of Sheryl. Jeffrey, you know Doug, and we've had breakfast with Doug before, and we've interviewed him. And for those of you who don't know it, Doug's father's name was Hal Wing, and he created this little ladder some years ago called the Little Giant Ladder. And actually, if you look, it's a significant story of how Hal Wing and how they moved this product into there. And many times that company was in deep doo-doo. And yet through innovative processes like we're talking about here, that's how they turned it around. So that's an inspirational story also. So Randy, I don't know if you know who Doug Wing is, but that's the Little Giant Ladder Company his daddy started some years ago. Very, very inspirational. And Sheryl, super nice guy, isn't he?
He's a great guy.
Great guy. We were in Phoenix, had breakfast with him about a year ago when we were on the business trip. So all this stuff you're talking about is fantastic, Jeffrey. So Josh, what would be the first thing you would ask Jeffrey today?
Well, as we discussed earlier, I'd like to be called Mr. Wolfe, which I think is cool as shit. Especially if you got like a wolf tattoo or something, or like you had some sort of shirt on that all just, just, you know,
He just rips it open. Like he
Yeah.
just rips it open.
Oh, whoa!
I would die laughing. I would enjoy every second of that. But one of the things I know you mentioned was underutilized resources. And what were some of those when you would go through and that you thought were like the most underutilized?
People. Hands down, number one, head and shoulders above everything else that's underutilized is people, which is a leadership challenge. And that was something that I learned. You may find this hard to believe. I was kind of a hothead, a bit excitable when I was younger. My wife has helped me mature a lot in that arena. And to be in a position as a leader within a company and be able to be open to, maintaining authority, sure, but being open to my role as the leader isn't to be the smartest person in the room and have all the answers. My role is to set the table so that the people on my team can bring what they know to get collectively so that we can get the best answer we can for what we're focused on and need to get done in the moment. And then do what's needed to lead them through adapting and implementing that change.
Okay. So you said something that I say often is being the smartest person in the room. How do you get those people to speak up? Because I know a lot of us as business owners, we feel like we have to be the smartest person in the room because you're just like, you get so frustrated sometimes. And, how do you get those people to buy in and speak up and, take ownership of it? Because whenever I roll out processes and I'm trying to get them to buy in, it is, like, hey, like I'm texting with some of my team members right now about a new inspection form, just, getting feedback and stuff. And there, of course, usually most people just say, oh, everything looks great. And of course, that's not what I want to hear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's setting the example for one thing, that I'm not infallible. And I mentioned it, there's a chapter I titled Behind the Scenes. It is a BTS chapter, and opened that with, it's just examples of stuff that happened that it didn't include in the stories to give some more insight into what's the reality in leading change within a company. And part of that was I made some major screw ups working with that company, and we still achieved what we needed to achieve. And I was open with that. I've gotten much more comfortable with, from public speaking, it's helped me be much more comfortable with not being the smartest guy in the room. When you walk out on stage in front of 50, 60 business owners, and it's both men and women, with the tail of your white shirt sticking out of the dark blue suit pants that you're wearing, doing those kinds of things, and other mistakes on projects and whatnot, to go, you know what? I know I'm going to make mistakes. If I'm open with that, because I've worked with companies where it's not a safe environment. You make one mistake, you're done, and everybody's waiting. It's that kind of environment. It's like, I'm going to wait and catch you at a mistake because I can get one up on you, and that'll elevate me within the business, which is another leadership problem to allow that to happen.
I always tell them, so I can deal with human errors. I just can't deal with, we didn't use our checklists or follow procedures and things like that. Because human errors, I make human errors, and I like to say I'm practically perfect, but I do make human errors. One of the things, like as Jerry will tell you, I love to cook, and a lot of that is experimentation.
Yeah,
and as I tell my wife all the time, it's not going to always be good. And if I have my own recipe books I write them out as I tweak my recipes over time. And, and I keep telling her she's so afraid to cook. Like, it's okay. Like, it's okay to make these mistakes. I learned from them. Like, hey, I forgot and bought salted chicken stock this week instead of unsalted. And I forgot to taste it before I added salt. So it's an important part.
So even Josh Kelly makes human mistakes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Can I write that one down? We need to remember that for future with him.
You're going to have to date that one, Jerry.
Yes, we will.
We've got it on video.
Okay.
There you go.
Right after Cheryl's birthday, Josh admitted he was a human being. Okay, so that's great.
I wrote it on paper, so it's good forever.
There you go. So, Jeffrey, here's my first question for you, which is in reading your book, you hit on one of the key things that I see so many people in every business has, which is a high amount of waste. And one of the things that I have to do is convince people. In fact, I did an analysis this week, and that was one of the things is like making them realize how much waste costs them because for every dollar of waste, it takes a certain amount of dollars in sales to make up for that, which is tied into what the net profit of the company is. And the higher the net profit is, the less the amount of sales dollars we got to do this with. So, one of the things you hit on in your book was waste and lean operating principles. How big a part was that in where they were to this clock ticking? If that wasn't fixed, they were certainly going to bottom out.
It was everything. That really it was everything. And one of the things I wanted to do was not get caught up in the terminology. I mean, I'm also a recovering MBA, but just to go, hey, this is how we talked about it when we were doing it, and I so appreciated when you made that comment back when we read the book and go, hey, this is about lean, and it's like, yeah, absolutely. And I really followed what I had learned. I had the opportunity to go through Toyota production system training at one of their factories here in the Los Angeles area. And we modeled that approach where it was, look, here's what we need to do. We're going to train. We're going to give you a piece of information, show you how to do it, go through doing it with you in the classroom. Then we're going to go out in your production area and do it. And waste was so huge because in manufacturing, it makes it tangible. You get a roll of steel like you see on a flatbed semi truck sitting out in the receiving yard. You can resell that on the market, and depending on what's going on with pricing, you can pretty much get your money back, or maybe even make a profit or lose a little bit. You can roughly sell it for what you bought it for. As soon as we move that inside the plant and start cutting sheets of metal off of it, it is now worth scrap until we have a product going out the door that we can invoice a customer for. So we were looking at from the time we set that roll of steel on the ground on our facility's yard, how long does it take to get to a point that we can get $1 from a customer back on that? And it turned out that what took about 3.5 hours to build took us 3 weeks to get from raw material to when we're handing it to a customer and giving them an invoice. And that was our primary measure of waste. And we wanted to make that as much. If it takes 3.5 hours, we want to get our money back for 3.5 hours because that's money tied up. If that cost $20,000 for a roll of steel, and that's probably not the actual price, but that means that $20,000 is now sitting, has been spent, possibly was borrowed in order to buy it. So now you're paying interest on top of it. And we can't do anything to recapture that $20,000 investment for 3 weeks. Out of that 3 weeks, we're actually only taking action on getting that money for 3.5 hours. If that makes sense.
Gotcha. So waste recovery, waste reduction, that was a big part of them avoiding, and I'm going to call it the clock clicking midnight where it's all over with.
Yes.
Okay, so waste was big. And see, this is what we work with to make every company realize how much waste is in that company and how much that waste is cost them. As a rule, businesses are looking for sales, but they're not looking for the sand. In fact, this is an hourglass that I use that I give people here to illustrate. These are the grains of sand, just like the money that's going right between your fingers. So waste was a big part of recovery of this company.
Yes, it was a huge. We knocked out 60% of their work in process cost in 30 days.
60%.
Yeah.
That's huge.
60%.
Huge.
That's unreal.
And we did it in half the square footage with half the number of people.
Yeah.
When we got
And
done.
so, in fact, this is the next book I'm working on that's getting towards its final draft right now, and which is on waste and how to turn waste dollars into profit dollars. That's my next book. I've now been working on about 6 months now. So, Randy, it's your turn. What would you ask Jeffrey? Is this an interesting conversation for you, Randy?
Well, actually, I want to tag along a little bit on waste. When I talk to a smaller business and we talk about the simplicity of just using some software, which I know Josh loves, but if we use software for time tracking, 15 minutes a day per employee is 65 hours a year. And people think like, oh, well, 15 minutes isn't that much because the employee makes $22 an hour. Okay. But it's not really what it costs you. I know for my business, it's $112 an hour to put a person to work times 65 hours times 11 people is 80 some $1,000s a year in complete waste. So when you talk waste, my ears perk up because I don't want to sell 240,000 to make that 80. So I appreciate you letting me pop in with that one. What I want to ask you real quick is when you are working with some of these companies, what are some areas in their businesses that you see that they take way too much time and energy on that's just really not as necessary? Once you dig in and once you find out, is there a common thread or theme?
Focus, where they're attempting to do too many things at one time. Because even in a taking the back office, in the accounting office, where you have someone that's working on the bookkeeping, you interrupt that person, whatever they were working on. Research has shown that it takes 30 minutes for them to get back to full productivity on what they were doing. And when you annualize that, like you did, that's brilliant, Randy, to look at what does this really cost us annually, right? In a big manufacturing facility, it's not uncommon to depending on what the job is, where sometimes you're paying people to do nothing but walk for a month because the building's so big and things aren't located where they need it. But even in a bookkeeping process, that interruption, how many times does that happen a day? So if you interrupt that person just 4 times a day, which really doesn't seem like too much, you got a question, so go ask the bookkeeper the question. That's an hour. That's 2 hours out of that person's day from a productivity standpoint. That was
100%.
long. And if they're attempting to, a more common thing is they're working on something, got the screen open over here, emails up, it's like, oh, email pops up. Same thing. You're losing 15 to 30 minutes, however long it takes them to read the email and do whatever that takes. Then they lose the transition time from one task to the other. They're losing that 15 to 30 minutes, which is why a lot of times we find the real productivity in an office environment is more like 3 hours out of the day, out of an 8-hour day.
I like your 13 to 30 better. Has a better ring to it. 13 to 30. Let's go with that from now on.
Well, as long as whatever gets lodged in the mind, so go, oh yeah, you know what? This is a 13 to 30 situation. We're losing this again.
Yeah.
No, I like that. Focus is a great answer.
Yeah. And you're dead on the money, because one of the questions I kind of come up in analysis, what's the average waste per person per day in the company? Then we multiply that by the number of people in the company. Then we multiply that by 5. Then we multiply that by 48 for 48 weeks in a year. And then we average this out, and it's like, hey, Mr. Employer, you only lost $1.2 million last year to waste. And it's like all of a sudden, and I can remember doing this in so many SWAT meetings and watching the owner's eyes just starting to go to the back of their head. But again, to take the action, many times the clock's got to be ticking. Sheryl, what's your next question for Jeffrey? Mr. Wolfe, as Josh likes.
No, just Wolf. There's no Mr. It's just
Wolf. Okay.
Just Wolf.
What's your next question for the Wolf?
Well, I'm just going to interject. Your book hit home because I own a manufacturing plant. So I understand the metal to product. And yeah, it takes the time. But one of the things I was looking into is we're talking about the digital marketing. Okay. So how has the rising of the digital marketing changed the landscape for small businesses? And what are some of your effective strategies for navigating the new environment?
You have to have a physical process that works before you go digital. Otherwise, you're overwhelming yourself with chaos and errors. Is one of the first problems. If it doesn't work in the physical world, it's not going to work really well in the electronic world. It does help with productivity when it's set up right. That being said, and I want to come back to Jerry's book on operating procedures. That ties into Randy's question as well. A lot of companies don't have the basic operating procedures set up, so they don't have that consistency that they can use as a model to go to an electronic process. When setting up a digital marketing strategy, you have to have your customer defined right. You have to have your message defined right before ever even beginning the digital process. Otherwise, you're still going to end up just diverting money that's not converting sales into a new process that's still not converting sales, or at least not the way that it should.
I mean, I've seen so much
But-
digital marketing that should have never been started.
Yeah.
No, because the marketing's got to address a pain for people to buy. To get, I'm going to take Randy there as an example. He's going to buy for two reasons. Number one, he's got a pain. Something hurts. Or number two, he's got a desire. That's why he's got a fancy new red Corvette, because that wasn't a pain. That was a desire. Might have been a pain on Brittany's part to listen to him about the Corvette, but
Not at all.
it wasn't at all. Okay, so she wanted that too. Okay.
She loves that car.
Anyway,
Yeah.
but it's got to address that pain point or that desire, and that's the message you got to get out. So, Josh, what would be your next question for Wolfe?
So, actually, I wanted to go back to the 30-minute loss thing, because that's something I personally preach as someone with ADD, because, you know, I mean, I know that about myself. If you interrupt me, my train of thought is, again, 30 minutes, probably at least. So I'm very big on that, which is why I created, basically the form of communication I did with the digital knowledge base, so that would give my team members that information, so they wouldn't have to ask me, over and over and over the same questions. So like and in that aspect, they don't interrupt their other team members with those questions as well. So that's speaks to me, because as I said, I built my whole company around that premise of how many people does it take to do the job.
Okay. Is that the question, Josh?
No, but so I know when you had to turn around the company, under 30 days, what was that a culture problem? Did you have problems getting people to buy in? What was that like?
That's an excellent question, because you'd think there's new ownership to the company, and the new owners looked around, they go, manufacturing company in Los Angeles, California. No, we're shutting this down and we're moving everything out, which would leave 180 plus people without jobs. And the opportunity we had was going, look, so the decision was already made, and then beginning to engage their teams. You would think that under that pressure, like going, yes, we need to do what we can. And that wasn't the response with everybody. So it started with a lot of communication. It's like, look, here's why we're doing this. A lot of excellent and pointed questions, like going, oh yeah, but what do you know about this in terms of what they do? To which, I was just honest with them. Going, look, I could start today and work for 10 years and I'm never going to catch up to you being as good as you are at what you do. Here's what I'm bringing to the table. We can make this place work, but we've only got this amount of time or we're all out of jobs. And that helped focus. We ended up, there was some crazy stuff. Like, for example, this was somebody in frontline management that was fighting things, and it turned out he was running a theft ring inside the company. And when
that's usually a red flag, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, major flag. Yeah.
They could only find 3. To keep a short story short, we could only find 3 of the 7 forklifts they had on the books. Forklifts, not something small that's easy to misplace.
Paper clips.
Yeah, right. It's not like someone's taking paper clips out of the office by the box out of the supply cabinet. And because we went through the rigor of, we started with the customer and then went backwards through everything they did, because we wanted to align what they were doing with what is it the customer's really buying? What's the problem we're really solving for the customer? And that started to identify some of these other issues. The key, coming directly to your question, to engaging the people on their teams, was that open communication. We were clear about what we were doing. It's like, look, we got 30 days. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to go about it. This is my value system and why I do this and how I'm going to approach it. I need you to give me some benefit of the doubt for 2 weeks, because you'll start to see results and that I am walking the way I'm talking right now, but we don't have a lot of time to debate this. And most of them were like going, okay, thanks for giving us the honest truth of what's going on, because rumors were flying about what was going to happen. And it wasn't really open communication. The management team at the company was very, very nervous about just telling people point blank, here's what's going to happen.
Wolf, do you think that in your experience, when you've gone into these companies, right? You just said it. Management doesn't really want to tell anybody because they don't want anybody to leave ahead of time.
Yeah.
Do you also find that pretty much when you get pushback from a certain department, it's either inefficiency or insecurity and or theft, right? Some sort of theft.
Yeah. Mostly insecurity. The theft has been more rare. I mean, I had senior management at a Fortune 100 company had to deal with death threats face to face.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting day. My Harley days served me well on that one because they expected I was going to fold up, and it was I was like, really, we're going to go down this path,
right?
But most of the time it's insecurity because you're messing with people's livelihoods, their ability to support their families. The example I like to use is I've been bungee jumping here in Los Angeles at a place called the Bridge to Nowhere that's up in the middle in the mountains. Asking someone to take that risk with their work to do even a minor change in what their work habit is, let alone a massive re-engineering of it, redesign of it, is the equivalent of asking them to step over to the wrong side of the railing on a bridge and jump off of the bridge with you. It's the same emotional response, just a different level of intensity. And some of these folks would really have some, depending on what's going on in their family life that we may not know about. You know, it might be they're just living hand to mouth and they've got a kid that's on that's on dialysis, and they're just barely making ends meet, and anything that upsets the apple cart puts their child at risk health wise. We were finding scenarios like that, and we're sitting down having talks going, look, we're doing everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen. So it's resistance from 1,000 different forms of fear, most of which are legitimate. As leaders, we need to address that right up front and make it clear that we're going to have an open conversation around that. And we made it clear that one of the values for that project that we made clear was it's okay to not be happy about it, to debate it, to push back on it. If being subversive is not okay. We had a department head, the head of, I won't name the department. We had one of the management team department heads run actually a counterinsurgency against what we were doing. And one of the mistakes that I made was not making sure we fired him right up front, because we had a long conversation. The key executive that ran that factory, he and I had a long conversation about what kind of culture do we want to create here and what kind of message do we want to send out to the workforce. Here we've got somebody highly respected, been with the company almost 20 years, now is openly fighting what we're doing. If we walk him out the door, are we sending the message that we want to send? Because people aren't dumb. If they get the message that, hey, you know what, if you do this, you're out. If you don't do this, you're out. Then we won't get the questions that we need them to ask to help avoid making mistakes or missing things, right? Getting that knowledge that they've got from the people that are doing the job every day have the most knowledge. And we need to be able to as leaders, bring that out, help them articulate that, to tell us in a way going, hey, don't do this because here's what's going to happen. And go, okay, great. How if we, help us craft a way to meet the objective by taking the right steps. Yeah. The other thing we were concerned about was if as a cultural issue, if it's somebody that's been around for a long time who has now not bringing to the table what we need, are we just going to kick them to the side of the road, or are we going to honor those years of service? We decided to honor those years of service, moved him into another part of the organization. And the only reason that I signed off on that was I missed the counterinsurgency that he was running. So it was my error. From a leadership standpoint, I take ownership of that. If I had seen that, and if I had been looking deeper and paying more attention, I feel I should have in hindsight, then we would have fired him right up front and been clear about why, rather than having to do it 8 months down the road.
Yeah.
Sure thing.
So, Wolf, you've hit on actually my next question. So I'm going to go into a little more detail. One of the things that we often find is that we have what I'm going to call a sacred cow. There's somebody been on there and they've been here for years. And I've seen organizations, and this person is basically the bad apple of the bunch. And as we all know, if you have bad apple in the bushel, it's going to spoil the rest of the fruit. So how important was this in turning this company around to fix the culture and get the bad apples out of the way?
We couldn't do it otherwise.
It wouldn't have. So, in other words, if they had not made the personnel changes, not made the culture changes, then the waste wouldn't have made any difference. They still would have failed. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because it wouldn't stick. They just go back to doing what they've always done.
Okay, so I want to make
or
sure.
They fight it so that, because since we had a clock ticking, really, if they wanted to, all their team would have had to have done was just wait us out for 30 days.
Gotcha. I understand. I just want to hit that because it is a combination. If you just fix the waste, you're still going to the time clock. If you just fix the culture, you're still going to the time clock. If you don't fix it, because you did all kinds of things, but again, why did it work? You had a deadline. If it wasn't done in 30 days, this is going to put 160 some people out of work, plus the people that depend on them for those paychecks and the suppliers and everything else. So, Randy, you're next. And so you'll know, I hope you noticed, but you had a friend said hello a while ago by the name of Tammy Colburn, said hello on here for you. Okay, so if that's somebody you know, So anyway, Randy, this will be your last question. So make it a good one because we're going to go around one more time, okay?
All right, it's an easy one. So I'm sure that when you're meeting with these businesses, and maybe even some personal friends on this level, when you start to open up the conversations, how many times have you seen that these businesses or people are funding their failure? Like they don't think they're failing because they're just getting these gap loans and programs and grants, and somehow it's working. But when you dig in, they're really funding their failure.
Yeah, that happens a lot. And again, it's shiny object syndrome applied to finances. It's like, oh, this money's available. Let's go get it. And there's no plan. There's no strategic objective behind it. They're not really looking at their financial structure. What's that really going to do to their books? How does that impact their fixed cost? So it feeds the problem, and it allows them to get into a much, much greater crisis. Because instead of fixing the problem, we just took on another loan. We had a different company, not the one from the book. They did some work with. The CEO had taken on a whole bunch of debt. He got a call from their bank and said, "You violated the covenants of your financing. You have 30 days. We're closing all of your accounts and calling your loans."
Wow.
Yeah, it was like, oh. What do you do now? And we were able to connect him with a group that does workouts on stuff like that. And they barely, by the deadline that they had, they were able to make that happen where they could get, but it's all no working capital, no place to deposit checks from customers, the loans on it was another manufacturing company, the loans on their assets for the company being called, or guess what? We're going to start collections or asset seizure. And it was exactly the kind of situation you were talking about, where this guy's seeing opportunities to do stuff, and he's bringing on more debt and more liability to the company. And his bank looked at it and went, "Whoa, what are you doing here? We would never fund this. In fact, we're not. So you're done. Go find somebody else that's willing to take this risk."
Yeah, I've seen that too. And I think the funding their failure is kind of like they're not changing any of their processes. They just got a little bit more money right now to bridge that gap, in hopes that it just happens, and that's just not going to work.
Yeah. And
it's like General Motors. I'm sorry, Jerry. General Motors went bankrupt on a cash flow of $130 billion a year. It's like funding your problem.
Mhm.
And Wolf, that's what happened to me. The clock did hit midnight, and you just described the exact same situation. Every time the bank would just keep giving me more money, more money, more money. And then one day they said, we need it all back. You got 5 days. And
Oh.
that's when I tumbled 12, 14 years ago. And believe me, that's if you want to know true magic moments in life, that's a magic moment. When they call your loans, you get this stack of letters. Believe me, it's not a good feeling. It's not a good one at all. Okay. So Randy, did that get you answered?
It did.
Fantastic. Sheryl, you got one more shot. What you got for the wolf?
The wolf. Hey, wolf. Actually, I'm sure there's two-sided businesses here, brand new and people that have been in business for a while. Give me your best advice for each one. If you had to just pull something out of your pocket and come up with 1 or 2 points for each one, well, I'd love to hear it. And I'm sure there's other people out there that could definitely use your expertise.
Well, one thing that I'd like to suggest for both, whether brand new or been around for a while, is what can you do without spending any money? Use that as a base rule. The story in the book, one of our primary rules was we can't spend any money. We turned that company around in 30 days without any capital expenditures. It was just, we even got the state of California to reimburse them for the cost of the labor time for having people in training. So it was very low impact. And by putting that kind of pressure on it, that drives innovation. It's like, how can we make this happen without buying something new? And with new companies, look at what works. Look at other industries too. You know, what problem are you solving? Start with the customer and work backwards to how what you need to acquire. What software do you need? What suppliers do you need to work with in order to solve that problem for your customer? And be very, very rigorous. Rigorous is too polite of a word, but I'll go with that for now. On any kind of waste, anything that isn't what your customer would pay you for doing, don't do it. They used bookkeeping as an example earlier. Customers don't pay us to do bookkeeping in our businesses, but we have to do it. It's a necessary thing. So it's like, all right, that's fine. It's a necessary, but not value adding. Anything that is not, that doesn't fall into that category of your customer is going to pay for you, or there's another compelling reason, like you can't run a business without keeping the books level of answer. Don't do it. Find a way to get it done without bringing that waste into your business. With businesses that have been around for a while, ask yourself this: how long does it take from the time we make a sale, or not even to make a sale, from a time we put an advertising dollar on the table? How long does it take us to get a sales dollar in the bank? Not an invoice, not a check is in the mail, but it's actually in the bank. And begin looking at your business from how can we shorten that? Even in the digital world, it may be days. Sometimes it looks like minutes, but when we actually track the cash flow, that electronic payment is probably getting caught up somewhere by somebody for a couple of days before it actually shows up in the bank account.
Yeah. And you've hit
and really be ruthless about looking at that process. You know, how does that tie into what we're doing for the customer and what the customer is really paying for?
Yeah. And you know, it's a neat thing about home services. Our money comes fast. When you clean air ducts or do a restoration job, Randy, your money comes at the end of the job. If you're a manufacturer, you got products sitting there that's got to be converted, got to be shipped, got to be manufactured, and all this other stuff, which could be 90 to 120 days from buying the initial materials to when you actually create that invoice. Right, Jeffrey?
Yes.
And that's the big issue. Sheryl runs a manufacturing company. She knows she's got steel. She's got hardy boards stacked up in a warehouse. Okay. Yep. That's money sitting there on the ground. And the faster you can process those, and lean principles are where you have a push-pull inventory. It arrives as you need it. It doesn't sit there for weeks and months in advance.
And so we had to learn, let me insert there, we had to learn not to pre-buy so much unless it was going to say an insatiable amount of money.
Yeah, it is. So, Josh, what's your last question for the wolf?
So one of the things I like to say is moving customers to light bulb moments, to where it gets them, and especially in our industry, the chimney industry, the customers don't understand, what we're doing really for them, or the terms or anything like that. And that's kind of how I developed our team's sales process, was to move them to that light bulb moment, through brochures and videos and some other things. Did you have, when you're making these turnarounds, was there anything specific other than, hey, we're 30 days or die, to get some of these people to get those light bulb moments to turn things around?
Making work enjoyable. And I mean, not like a party environment, but so that it's just not a grind, and making it so that somebody told me this when I was new in my career, and then I grew to understand it. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes to understand what's going on with a company. Watch how the people arrive in the morning, particularly on Monday. How do they get from where they park to the building that they're working in? What's the experience when you walk in the door in terms of how you're greeted and by whom you're greeted? Go check the bathrooms. Right? If people are coming to work on Monday morning like little kids dragging their lunchboxes into school, not a good sign. If you walk into the lobby or wherever the entrance is into the building, if there's not somebody that's like going, "Hey, how you doing? Glad you're here. Can I get you something? Let's talk." That type of a greeting. The Walmart effect, where there's a reason they greet people when they walk in the store. If they don't have that effect, not a good sign. If you go into the bathrooms and there's paper towels thrown everywhere and nobody's, looks like a bomb went off in the bathroom, and it may be not that it's filthy, but just that it's disorganized, and it's clear that people are going, "Oh yeah, I missed the trash can with a paper towel. It's somebody else's job to get it." Not a good sign. So that's a good hint on where they're at with the culture. So getting people to care about what's going on and to have some pride and make the work enjoyable from the standpoint of it's not a soul sucking, leaves me exhausted, no energy at the end of the day kind of experience, as opposed to I'm tired, but I'm energized because we kicked butt today kind of a feeling. That comes back to, how do we honor the people? What are the values that we demonstrate as management, as leaders? And are we making it clear that we're not paying you for your hands? We're paying you for what you know and who you are. And we're glad that you're here and part of the team.
Does that answer your question, Josh?
It does.
Okay. So I can just see it now, Jeffrey. The wolf. You show up the door. You got a shirt on with a wolf's head. The wolf is here. The countdown is beginning. Okay. Jeffrey, I think you've given some fantastic words of wisdom here today. And I put the link in here to purchase Jeffrey's book on Amazon. And it appears that if you're a Prime member, you can get the electronic version free of charge. Jeffrey, is that correct? Now I'm a printed guy. Me and Randy are printed people. Okay. Sheryl can go either way. Josh is a digital guy, but hey, that's beside the case, but order this book. Like I said, I think there's some significant points in here. That's why I brought the wolf on here, so we could go through this. Maybe we call you the wolf of saving business. You're the wolf of Wall Street. Maybe you can be the wolf of business salvation.
Could I leave one parting thought?
Yes, sir, you can.
Regardless of size of business, we're in June of 2023. The year is over for most businesses. And I say it in this context. How long does it take you from the time you put a marketing dollar on the table to when you get a sales dollar in your bank account? Because if you do something different, if you market to a new niche, if you roll out a new product, if you do an upsell, something new that you need to advertise, it will probably take 90 days or so. A lot of businesses will take up to 6 months, especially in manufacturing. So that means we're already into 2024. What you do with your business today probably won't give you a dollar in your bank account until January of 2024.
So what you're doing today, you're investing in the future returns on this, which that's one of the things that Mr. Spurling is an expert there, is he learned years ago of rolling these profits back in. You didn't live fancy, did you, Randy? You kind of scrimped by. If what you're telling me is the truth, you didn't live an easy life. But you invested back into your businesses. Am I correct?
Yeah, our favorite phrase is we didn't live expensive, we invested expensive.
Yeah, that's it. So I think anyway, if you're listening to this on either the live or on the replay, we hope this time's been of value to you. The Wolf, you've been a great guest and been on here. Randy, it has been a true pleasure to have you on here. Have you learned anything today, Randy?
Yeah, of course, every day.
There you go. That's what it's all about. So anyway, we appreciate you listening to this episode of the Chimney and Fireplace Success Network. This is presented by CVC Success Group, and our mission is to help you turn your business dreams into your business realities, and your business realities should be providing you a return so you can have the things and enjoy the things that you want in life. And with that, we'll see you next week on the next episode of the Chimney and Fireplace Success Network. And we thank